Welcome back, everybody, for the last session of our next audio event this morning. After focusing on podcasting and what's happening in transformation in the in-car audio landscape, let's have a look now at the challenges for the audio streaming industry in Europe. And in order to talk about that, I will be with Lubor Zoufal from Active Radio in Czech Republic and David Quijada from EBU. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you to be with me today. We'll be talking about the transformation challenges, the content offer moving from a linear to on-demand, what's happening in terms of digital transformation with the DAB and DAB Plus in Europe, and then final perspectives, what's happening in the markets in terms of business opportunity, advertisement, monetizations, partnership strategies, and so on. We'll be live for 30 minutes, and starting right now, I would like to start with you, Lubor. Can you give me a general overview of what you are doing in Czech Republic for Active Radio?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm head of digital of Active Group. We're operating 5 radio stations plus one music interactive service called U-Radio. And 2 years ago, we have launched a spin-off of that service. We call it U-Radio Talk. Which is pretty much generating the smart radio made of podcast stitching, which it's a service that's familiar on other markets as well. In terms of the reach, we have about 20% of the market in terms of FM listenership, and our online radio listening is, we can say, roughly the monthly digital listening equals to our daily reach in FM, and we see there like a stable growth year over year.
Okay, so, thank you for that. I think, David, that the European broadcasters knows you, or at least what EBU is. But for those who are non-broadcaster, can you introduce yourself a bit and tell us what EBU is doing in Europe?
Yes, of course. We are the Professional Association of Public Broadcasters in Europe. So we work together with BBC, Radio France, Swedish Radio, UK, and all the public broadcasters across the continent to support their activities, to help them to be more competitive, to support them in their transformation. Not everybody is going through that kind of transformation. And we do that through content exchanges. We do that through advocacy activities, through funding innovation within the members. And in my case, as the person responsible for the market research unit of the EBU, also in terms of research, helping them to understand what the trends in the market are and supporting them in whatever they need to understand those changes and how to adapt to be a competitive player there.
Which will allow you to give us some interesting insight about what's happening in the European markets.
I think so.
Yeah, so let's move directly into today's topic, starting with you, Lubor. So the audio market landscape has been increasingly digital over the last year, obviously. How completely did you change your operations over the last year, and how did you adapt your content offer?
When I look at it from the business perspective, we have had like programmatic audio available on the market for several years. We are closely working with one of our international partners on that. However, let's say the demand from the market was quite cold, like no one really believed in digital audio. What made like significant shift this year when Google enabled the audio buying in their DB360 tool, and it sort of like made a push for the agencies to start taking audio really. Digital audio, taking like really relevant product for programmatic buying. The second thing that we see on the audience part of the market is definitely a shift from the linear listening to the on-demand listening and to the catch-ups, where we pretty much doubled last year to have like 20 million streams, if I can call that streams or plays, of all our content that we produce. That means native or the catch-ups. So this is getting like really significant traction. One thing I want to mention, it's what we see the additional traction comes from not from our side. That's pretty much stable. It comes from the other distribution platforms like Spotify, the other platform that we have, Apple Podcasts, or even YouTube that is used for the podcasting distribution or for the catch-up distribution.
So, David, from a European perspective, what have you seen as the major trends in the last years? Did you see, for instance, significant shift toward digital? And is there, for instance, a distinction between European countries, some that are already more advanced in terms of digital audio content compared to others? What have you noticed the most over the last years?
Yeah, of course, it's very interesting to look at what was happening perhaps a decade ago, and the amount of shift and uncertainty that now we are facing is totally unexpected for whoever was in the market 10 years ago. And I think that the first thing that we need to consider is that uncertainty is here to stay. It's not that we are going through a tumultuous period and this will at some point become something more stable, but I think that broadcasters have to live with this uncertainty as part of their strategy. So this is the first thing. Of course, moving to digital, this is happening. We know that this is happening. We don't know exactly at what pace, if this will be probably not linear, and how this will go. So this is like the big question mark that we see. We tend to spend most of our time to talk about the on-demand podcast and so on, but I always like to remind that still on average across the European markets, 85% of radio consumption is still done on traditional linear radio. So it's still strong. It was very high. We are losing reach. We are losing time spent listening to radio, but we were coming really from a very high peak. So it's normal that when you have more players in the market and the market is being fragmented, you are going to lose that. And on the other side, on-demand is growing a lot, but the baseline was really low. So we are still seeing a kind of hybrid market. On-demand is growing and will grow. I think that everybody expects that. And as Lubor said, we have seen an acceleration already from last year. I think that this is part of the consequences of the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns. But still, linear is still very important. And within linear, still most of the consumption is still to old school FM. We don't talk much about that, but still most of the consumption is there. And it also means that most of the advertising expenditure is still there. So we need also to consider those elements. The reality, the picture now, and where we are facing, and I would like also to focus more on, okay, how the market may develop, but I think that we tend to forget still what's the starting point from that market.
So looking especially on that starting point, and we were talking about the listenings, I would like to talk more about the content in itself. Lubor, how did you adapt your content offer to this shift to digital? For instance, did you accelerate the pace of creating podcasts or on-demand audio? How many podcasts you produce so far, for instance? And what are the most listened podcasts you produce in Czech Republic?
One thing about the podcasting, which is actually funny as it's happening today, we launched 3 years ago Podcast of the Year events. We are producing that, and we'll be announcing this year's winners today in the afternoon. So that's one thing I forgot to mention. Maybe at the end of the session, I will tease who the winner is going to be. Back to your question. Pretty much we are having 10 relevant catch-ups that we update on daily basis. They're usually like extended versions of the shows that we run on the radio, either some like additional content that's didn't fit to the broadcasting, or we have late night show that is not suitable to broadcast on air due to legal purposes. Mm. And it's among one of our most listened podcasts that we have. It's Three Ladies Talk that we have like late night show. We started production of our native podcast as well. It's usually like talk, obviously, and we are updating those on weekly basis and getting traction there slowly, I would say, for the natives.
So the native podcast is something more recent. Do you see, for instance, Would you say that native is driving the increasing share of your audience, or is catch-up remaining something that's way more bigger than native podcasts?
It's for us as the radio, it's 70% is the radio catch-ups. Even older shows like we have produced like for many years in the past, and we're not updating them, but they are still getting traction as the new audience is getting to them. So this is fairly interesting that we get these like funny little shows that have not been updated for 10 years, but it's among one of our most listened podcasts actually that we have, and the 30% is the native production, of course.
That's interesting because you were saying that 70% is still catch up, and that's very close to the 85% David was talking about listening of traditional radio. And from your perspective, David, is native podcast is becoming something already big in Western Europe, or do you see also that traditional catch-up content is still driving most of the use?
I think it's becoming bigger. I think in most of the cases, and there are exceptions with some native shows that really get lot of traction, but in most of the cases, catch-up radio continues to be super important. Still, they have a brand that has been built across years, and I like Lubor's comment about that archive content that you were using for nothing, and now you can generate engagement to that content which was already produced, so your cost is nearly zero, just putting it in the platform. So I think that it's interesting in terms of just making the most of an IP that you already own. What I also see is that sometimes when we talk about podcasts, we tend to take this as an equivalent to talk radio, but I think it's not the same. I think that in podcasts we find a lot of stuff which would never air on radio, like educational stuff, training, professional podcasts. I listen to podcasts about market research. I highly doubt that there is a single market research show in radio for media across Europe. So this is a kind of different stuff, and it's very difficult to separate this from the actual consumption of more similar to radio podcasts. And then catch-up, I think that catch-up is not just an option. I think it's a taken for granted feature for the user. So if someone goes to your website and does not find that content there, that catch-up, it will be a frustrating experience. So I think that it's not an option. And I think that in some cases it may grow your audience, as Lubor mentioned, but I think that most of the growth for the digital platforms of broadcasters will come from original content, from native content. And we're starting to see in the measurement of the different broadcasters that there is a growing percentage of users that are digital-only users. So they don't engage with broadcasters in the traditional way, but they are just digital-only users. So I think that this is also a stimulus for broadcasters to invest there. And then in terms of content, I think that there are a couple of things I would like to mention. We see that the trends in terms of content are not just true crime, as used to be like the big driver of podcasts, but also things like comedy. But also in the last couple of years, we see news and sports, traditional and heavy radio stuff being also repurposed or created as a native content for podcasts. I think it's interesting. Everybody knows about the Daily from the New York Times. It was a publisher, a traditional news publisher, paper publisher, who really generated, was a bit the trigger of that movement for news. When we had many broadcasters heavy on news, which were not just taking this step. And I think that this is a lesson also for broadcasters to consider. You have the expertise, but also with podcasts and the on-demand space, the competition can come from unexpected places. And I think that the sports, perhaps 2 years later, is facing a bit kind of similar situation. So we have a lot of native content being created. We have the example of The Ringer, the network in the US, which was bought by Spotify last year. And I think that it's another area where traditionally radio has been very strong, and now it's becoming stronger in podcasts. So I think that there is an opportunity there. Finally, the topic of music. Music is the most important genre in radio, music radio. We have the issue of copyright. And I think that there is an obvious solution or an obvious partner there. I think that Spotify is making efforts to bring music-related podcasts into its platform. For the time being, it's still limited to using Anchor, its own tool, but it's obvious. Spotify already has agreements to use music in music streaming platforms. So I think it's not that difficult to connect the dots, and really thinking that this could be a way for broadcaster to clear the rights to use them in podcasts.
This is something I wanted to ask you, Lubor, regarding music, especially because I believe that you have streaming services called U-Radio in Czech Republic. How do you manage to integrate it with your new audio content offer? And what is the state, for instance, of building a music business in Czech Republic while most of the content is available for free on Spotify, for instance? Is, for instance, subscription offers sustainable? How do you manage to monetize this content and to create value from it?
One thing we started that service like many years ago. We already from the beginning formatted it as interactive radio. That meant it didn't go like the full on-demand version. We ended up at the stage that obviously the offers and the combos of Spotify or Deezer with the telco providers got really challenging for us in terms of to keep the business model relevant to pay all the royalties. So we introduced like subscription service that was cheaper, and we started to integrate that with the radio brands. That means like for our Europe 2 Frequency 1 brand, that the traditional FM audience can enjoy the interaction with the playlist, and they can give us the feedback on the music that we play. And you know, it's music streaming services in a way are still for the music fans, even if there are most of them. If you want to replay a song, you can pretty much search down like any song on YouTube. So there's still massive audience that doesn't necessarily need to own a music streaming app, and they're just okay to have a simple replay on your site or in your app.
So regarding the competition, there was something interesting that you were announcing that, for instance, if we look at music content, we are all listening to English songs, but which is not the case in podcasts, for instance. In European countries, the appeal for English content only works if you're an English native speaker or if you have a strong background in English. So do you think that being in a European country that it's not English native protects you from the competition in the podcasting landscape? And for instance, were you approached by international actors such as Spotify to produce content for them?
Yes, we're in touch with the Spotify as well. We use that as distribution channel for our content. So it's I would say you have to stay and be relevant where your potential audience is, and it doesn't really make sense to necessarily force like anyone to convert from the Spotify to your service just to listen to your content. It's then the challenge is pretty much doubling. In terms of music, first, our offer is a little wider than is on the Spotify. So yes, it brings us like something special on the music market. That Czech songs are something that makes our catalog unique. There are songs that are not available on Spotify, so it definitely makes sense. But on the other hand, market itself is small. You know, it's the audio market is about 8 million people, so it's hard to get the larger audiences, as you are limited to language. For the podcast, yes, definitely, it's put us into unique position because we can react way more quickly and actively to cooperate with the podcasters that are producing the Czech content. You know, so we are pretty much in touch with all the producers on the Czech market. There are about 1,500 podcasts actually produced in Czech Republic. Most of them are updated on a weekly basis, but we have about 200 episodes updated on daily basis from this. So yeah, it can make us special, that we can at least be closer to the producers. One thing I want to mention, as I see that as a quite a risk for us as a broadcaster, it's for the podcasting, it's really easy to enter the market. You don't need the equipment as we broadcasters need, like the studios, the distribution network, like everything around. All you need is just a pretty much like smartphone or a simple free tool, and you can start producing. So for the personalities that we have on the radio, it's easy to enter the podcasting market, and we see that as our two of our moderators. They are producing a true crime show on their own, and they're fairly successful. So for us, it's they produce it as a standalone. So for us as a broadcaster, it's important to find a good relationship with them.
So this is for the production side, but as we have 10 minutes left, I wanted to move to another topic, starting with you, Daniel. We are talking about IP then in terms of distribution for this kind of on-demand, but the other side of distribution is still broadcasting with DAB. And DAB+ has been rolling out for almost 10 years now in Europe. And we see that there's some distinction between countries in terms of integration of DAB+. What have you noticed, David, from your perspective as talking on behalf of the broadcaster? What have been the main challenges for them? What has been the state of the rollouts? And what DAB+ allowed to broadcaster nowadays in terms of distribution and in terms of content offer?
Yeah, I think it's obvious that there are very different speeds for the uptake of DAB across Europe. We see Norway, who already switched FM nationwide in 2017. Switzerland is going to do the same in 2023. So it's doable. That's the first message. It's doable. Then the second thing is that to do it properly, you need certain conditions. And in most of the market, perhaps we are not yet there. And we already identified this several years ago. And one of the main conditions is create the right incentive for all the players involved. And I think that the Czech Republic is a good example, because most of the commercial broadcasters have not found the right incentive to move into DAB. Of course, if you are in a market and you are running a business and you have to generate a profit, you cannot say, okay, let's move to this new platform, which will cost money to move it. And then in this new platform, on top of that, you'll have more competition. So actually, it's not a very attractive proposition, I would say. So this is not and this has happened in many markets. So I think that the examples of Norway, Switzerland, of the most advanced countries show that actually you need to generate those incentives for all the parties involved. And in the case of commercial broadcasters, it has been, okay, we secure you that you will not have new competitors there, that it will be a way to modernize your value proposition. You will be able to broadcast more channels because the new capacity will be allocated to the current players. So you will be able to expand your offer in this platform where a lot of people are listening. So you will have new monetization options. And in some cases, when possible, we will help you with the transition by assuming part of the cost, which is, for example, the case of Switzerland. So I think that for me, this is the main message. It's not just saying, okay, we're moving to digital because digital is cool and now everything is digital. You need to consider that FM is a very good value proposition, and people who are already there need to make an effort to move to somewhere else. So you need to help them in that effort. And this includes regulatory perspective, but this also includes all the players involved coming together and to agree in what is beneficial to all of them.
Which is interesting that, as you were mentioning, there is need of this incentive to move toward. And regarding what's happening in Czech Republic, Lubor, you were saying with me last time that while the transition is not 100% complete, you have to run both FM and DAB, which leads to very increasing costs. So what has been your journey so far? I know how you're dealing with that.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Like you mentioned, it's for us as a commercial broadcaster, what's significant, where the audience is, that we have to calculate that in our formula. It doesn't make sense to broadcast for us on to no audience or to small audience. There is no business model in there. It's completely different for the public radio station, but or the public funded broadcasters, but for us as a commercial radio, it would be killing. On the other side, what I see, even there is no fragmentation in content proposition. to be relevant and to have a critical audience to actually generate relevant revenues as a commercial broadcaster. Small radio stations are becoming parts of larger and larger networks, actually, to have the critical mass to be relevant to other propositions that are available to advertisers. So there is no fragmentation. It's quite an opposite, actually, traction where the winners take all money from the market. So this is the trend that I see.
Which was supposed to be the opposite, as because DAB was supposed to open the market and let more channels and content owners to launch their own broadcast stations, and instead you have consolidation.
Yeah. Well, for example, it opened for the public radio station to launch recently in Czech Republic a sports radio station, which is nice proposal. But it would be really hard to find a model to operate this commercially on the market, to get really a critical mass that you can offer to the advertising market. So that's the limitation that is defined by the size of the market that you have, and not necessarily like the formulas from bigger markets can apply to smaller language regions, I would say. Because,
and regarding this critical mass, did you see research, for instance, after the COVID period, for instance, a switch from FM to IP due to the fact, for instance, that people are not using their car anymore? Did you see a change of behavior?
Well, what we saw a slight increase in the digital listening. Definitely, what we saw is that common at work listening. There was this drop that's having a radio at work, as everyone was working home office, really changed that. So as you stayed as alone, you could listen to your podcast at home, or you could listen to your favorite station. When you have to decide with your colleagues, you rather vote something that is, I would say, more relevant to larger audience. So this was an interesting trend, but it pretty much with the opening, it's slowly returning back to the previous behavior. So it was rather like the summer change than really big trend that we could see.
So we have 2 minutes to conclude, and I will give you one each in order to give your conclusion. And that's something we haven't talked yet, and I would like to conclude with that. What are the perspectives for the European markets in the last 5 years? Starting with David, what do you see coming in next years? And then Lubor, I will let you conclude on that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that one of the things that we need to consider more importantly for the health of the radio market is the economics of the market, and we need to be very clear. It's unlikely that the advertising expenditure in radio will grow, seeing the current development, at least in traditional radio. So I think that the growth of the market will come from on demand and from these new propositions coming digitally. Still, I think that this will be just a small part compared to linear radio, but we are going towards a convergence of these two elements. Linear radio is going down. I said we are coming from a very high peak, and on the other side, on demand is growing. What is true is that audio in general is growing, so people are listening more to audio. So there are many opportunities there. So it's about identifying your strength as broadcaster or as an audio player and put those strengths into practice. I think it makes little sense to try to compete with big players like Spotify or like Facebook, who just recently announced that they are going also into podcasts. You cannot compete with those big guys. They are diversified, they are international, they have lots of money. You don't have that. So just focus on what your strengths are. It's about knowing the local audiences. It's about engaging with your local audience. And so you need to identify that, so to think strategically about where you want to be positioning the next 3, 5, 10 years.
Lubor, I would like you to react on that, especially regarding the competition. How do you see the market evolving?
Well, I was thinking one thing. What do we see? We have like population turnover, and we have like about 100,000 people dies like every year, and 100,000 people are born. And we see that with even with the podcasting adoption, as for those born into podcasting era, they're taking it as their first choice. For the conservatives one, they're having their first choice the FM radio. So and podcasts are like add-on service. So this is quite conservative, and the shift will be, and it seems so far will be going a little slowly than when many would expect. We are conservatives, so.
Actually, that's interesting because these are the topics that we are going to tackle this afternoon with the other panels. So thank you very much for your time, gentlemen. We will have a lunch break for an hour, and then we are gathering back at 1:40 p.m. talking about the in-car audio landscape. Can radio dominance last forever? And then we will have another panel about the strategic innovations for public and private radio. And then we will conclude with the partnerships for telecom operators. What have been the strategies in Europe in order to partner? Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen, and have a nice day. And Lubor, have a nice podcast even this afternoon.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.